Lucky Bear. Now, it's a bit of an ironic name because, as you can see, Lucky Bear, bless him, has been through the wars. So at one point during my childhood, the dog bit off one of his arms. Then he was accidentally thrown into the fire, and he still bears the scars of that event. And a lot of people might say, Claire, why on earth are you hanging on to this? But the truth is, Lucky Bear was my first ever friend. I have had him since I was a baby, and you just don't give up on your friends that easily, do you? And as Christmas approaches, it got me thinking about the toys of yesteryear, and toys just like Lucky Bear that may have shaped our childhood. Now, he's obviously taught me along the way friendship, empathy, and in a way, I imagine as a child, I thought he was a real thing. So in this episode, I want to look at some of the other toys that have helped shape British childhoods and go on a bit of a trip down nostalgia, memory lane, and see why some of them are more than playthings.
Long before we opened them, Christmas gifts taught us how to dream. Even before the paper was torn away, our imaginations had already taken over, filling that box in our minds with hope, with want, with all the things we might dare to expect. As a child, hoping for a parcel like that at Christmas could stir a whole mix of emotions, and excitement, anticipation, sometimes even dread. Maybe it was a toy that everyone else seemed to have, a doll whom you could trust with your secrets, or a shiny new football that would in turn make you king of the playground. And whatever gift you were wishing for, that waiting, that hoping, it might have taught you more than you realised. Toys are special in that way. They teach us patience, they teach us gratitude, sometimes they teach us disappointment, and often, without knowing it, they show us how the world works. Because behind the bright paper and ribbon, Christmas gifts have always been more than just play.
Hello friends, and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Claire and this is The Wanderlust Way. First off, let me say a huge thank you to everybody that supports this channel by liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing, sending super thanks, becoming members. Honestly, every single thing that you are doing is helping this little corner of the internet to grow. It's allowing me to continue making videos like this and sharing the stories that I find with you. Okay, so today we are in West Yorkshire in Ilkley, which is probably famous for quite a few things, and it's a beautiful place to visit. But we are coming on a bit of a time travelling adventure into Christmases of yesteryear, and we are looking at the nostalgia surrounding some of the Christmas toys that we might be used to from our own childhoods, but we're going a little bit further back than that as well, to the Victorian times, to learn about certain toys and how they have shaped us, how they have made us the people that we are become, and the fact that they are more than playthings. There's always a bit of a story behind them. There's also some very dark stories to consider as well, some a little bit haunting, and also some with some real dark moral grounds. So if that's the sort of story and adventure that you'd like to come on, maybe grab yourself a mince pie and a festive drink, because that is enough waffle. Let's wander. Our first stop is the Ilkley Toy Museum. Let's go. Our first stop is of course the Ilkley Toy Museum, which is located, funnily enough, in Ilkley. And I want to say a big thank you to them at this point, because they did open specially so we could go inside and have a look. Now, they have got some fantastic things in their collection, lots of the toys from yesteryear that I've been mentioning, and there might be some toys in here that you will recognise from your own childhood. Perhaps you've even got some of these hidden away in your attic. Do stay tuned to the very end though, because I have chosen 5 toys from this museum, and I think at least you will recognise at least one of them, and you might have had at least one of them in your playbox when you were younger. So stay to the end, I'll share you them all and you can let me know which one you owned yourself.
We often think of toys as simple things, something to pass the time, something to make us smile. But at certain moments in history, they were much more than that. They could be moral guides, reflections of social class, and sometimes they were the only magic a child could expect from the world. In Britain for centuries, Christmas came and went with little notice from children. It was a feast for the grown-ups, a holy day marked with prayer, not play. Even into the early 1800s, it was rare for a child to receive a toy on Christmas Day. For most, it was just another morning. But by the turn of the century, the world began to change. Philosophers spoke of childhood as something sacred. Educators called for toys that could teach, mould and gently discipline. And Christmas, once a rowdy public festival, was slowly becoming a quiet family affair.
In Victorian Britain, Christmas, as we might think of it, began to unwrap for the first time. The decorated tree, the twinkling lights, the notion of gifts given to children. And it was brought on really by royal influence and romantic imagination. So you've got Prince Albert with his Christmas tree. You've got Charles Dickens with his ghost stories, taught to us by candlelight, offering us thoughts of redemption. And in some homes, mostly the wealthy and the rising middle class, children began to receive toys.
But these weren't toys for the sake of fun, not entirely. They were often chosen with care, respectable, moral, educational, something to shape the child as much as entertain them.
Of course, this wasn't the reality for every child. So in homes where families were struggling to keep food on the table, where the children were working in the mills and in the pits, just like with the sort of families that we met in our Yorkshire pit stories earlier on this year, Christmas for them was very different. So for children to get a toy at Christmas, it was just completely out of reach.
They'd be lucky to get a handful of nuts, perhaps some fruit, or if they had a particularly creative parent, maybe a handmade peg doll. And so it's around this time that we can begin to mark the moment the toys started to become part of the Christmas ritual, at least for those who could manage it.
In the homes of the God-fearing, toys were also important there as well, and they had certain toys that were reserved, especially for Sabbath day. The Noah's Ark, of course, would be one of those, and it would be kept away and it would only be played with on a Sunday, because this is obviously considered not a boisterous toy. The children could sit down, they could play with this quietly, and they could learn the story of Noah's Ark, the animals going 2 by 2.
But toys weren't just about morals, they were about means. Because for many families, the kind of Christmas a child had, the kind of toy they received, if any, depended entirely on class and wealth. Mass production would change that. By the late 1800s, penny toys, cheap and cheerful, meant even some working class children could unwrap a bit of magic. But in those earlier decades, every toy was a whisper of who you were and who you were expected to become. And for Victorian families, giving a child a gift at Christmas wasn't just about generosity, it was a reflection of morality, of status, of love. A chance to instruct, to inspire, and to perform one's values, all tied up in a ribbon. We now know when the tradition of gifting toys at Christmas started to appear. So let's get down to why certain playthings were chosen and what they reveal about the expectations placed on children. Have a really close look at them and decide for yourself whether you think anything's changed even today.
Because when you look closely, play has never really been just play. It is a rehearsal, a practice for life itself. And there's no toy that demonstrates that perhaps more than, of course, the doll's house. The doll's house, of course, appeared on Christmas lists all the time. It still does today, no doubt. But back then it was no idle plaything, because the doll's house was a miniature version of our own real world. and it was setting expectations for girls especially, what they could expect from motherhood, teaching them basically how to be a domestic goddess of their time. Now the dolls, they would have to be neatly arranged, the beds would have to be made, it was important that everything was kept tidy, and in a way it was so that girls could become their mothers. They would run their house, their miniature doll's house, the same way that their mothers would run their house as well. So it was not just...
Now I have to confess something. When I was a child, I didn't always do things in the conventional way. But lucky for me, I was brought up in a different time. That was the 80s and 90s. Things were very different then to how it would have been for my grandparents, great-grandparents and all that. So a classic example of this is I did have a doll's house, yes, and I also had a farm. And I used to get a lot of pleasure from mixing the two of those toys together. So I would often bring the pigs and the chickens in to join in the dinner party. The cow, he would often have a wash in the bath. And the dolls, they'd be somewhere in the field. The farmer, he'd be in the garage sleeping. It was just absolutely bonkers most of the time. And to my Victorian ancestors, if I was behaving in that way in the nursery, well, I'd be a bit of a red flag, because that would be a clue that I would not really domesticated enough to run a household. I would be running a little bit of a topsy-turvy world, shall we say, because the notion of these toys was not just to teach the children about what their expectations were, but it was also a bit of a test as well. And to be quite honest, I would have failed miserably. What about you guys? Did you ever mix your two toy worlds together? And do you think that's okay to do that? And would you let your children do that? I mean, yeah, let's open this for discussion.
In the grand houses of Georgian and early Victorian Britain, a doll's house wasn't always for the nursery. Some stood nearly as tall as a child, with intricate rooms and tiny silver cutlery, not for play, but for pride. They were cabinet pieces, displayed in parlours, kept under lock and key. And they belonged not to children, but to women, aristocratic wives and daughters rehearsing how to run a household before ever setting foot in one of their own. It was domesticity in miniature, a space where taste, order and control could be practised quietly and elegantly. Every room was a reflection of status, every curtain, every carved chair, a whisper of the real home it aspired to mirror. These were not toys for messy hands and sticky fingers. They were the domain of the upper class, and the upper class alone.
As the 19th century wore on, there was mass productions then, German exports, and a growing middle class that changed the way that we saw play.
And with that, a quiet shift took hold. What began as a status symbol of aristocratic femininity slowly transformed into a childhood staple, still tied to domestic ideals, but now shared across classes. A reflection perhaps of changing expectations, and a glimpse of the world girls of every background were being shaped to inhabit.
So while the girls were learning about domesticity and keeping their home in order, the toys aimed at the boys were slightly different. You're looking at toy soldiers, engines, toys that instilled progress and power. By the late 19th and early 20th century, countless armies marched across many British living room floors. This one they've got here at Ilkley is, I've been told, is from the Victorian times. But there's lots of different varieties. So you've got your tin soldiers, you would have your wooden soldiers. Down here, we have even got some soldiers from the royal collection. So these two, I've just been told, have come from the nursery at Windsor Castle. So it was important, the soldiers, for every class of child.
They weren't just toys, they were preparation. Play was practice, and these tiny soldiers carried messages that reached far beyond the nursery. As the British Empire stretched across the globe, toy makers mirrored that expansion in miniature. Drummers, cavalrymen, sailors, generals, all proudly wearing the uniforms of the Empire.
If you were a boy playing with these toys, then they represented heroism, adventure, bravery. But they were obviously carrying that silent message that if you were a boy, you were expected to be brave, you were expected to show courage, and it was part of your duty.
It was patriotism in tin and paint, a chance to imagine yourself as a leader, an explorer, a conqueror, long before you'd even left the garden. And when the great wars of the 20th century came, many of those same boys who once lined their soldiers up on the hearthrug grew into men who lined up on real parade grounds, carrying the echoes of that early play.
Even after both the two world wars, the tradition of war toys and soldiers continued. And here we obviously have action men. So that's probably one of the most modernised versions of the war toy. The changes really are only the fact that the uniform changes, maybe the equipment changes, but I would say that the message is still there. What do you guys think?
Today the battlefields have moved from the carpet to the console. Our soldiers are digital now, clad in pixels instead of tin, fighting on screens instead of lawns. Games like Call of Duty or Battlefield might seem worlds away from lead figurines, yet the echoes are there. Strategy, competition, courage and control. The same fascination with heroism, danger and discipline, just reimagined for a new generation. It's not a criticism, just an observation. The way we play may have evolved, but the stories our toys tell us, well, sometimes they stay the same.
While soldiers trained young minds for battle, toy trains taught them about progress.
For children of the industrial age, trains represented movement, power and control. They were a child's first taste of machinery, of engineering, of a world racing forward on steam and steel. A well-behaved boy might be praised for keeping his track tidy, for managing his engines with precision, an echo of the discipline that factories and offices would one day demand. And, much like the doll's house, trains were never neutral. They were little lessons in order and ambition, helping to shape the workers, the engineers and the empire builders of tomorrow.
It is absolutely fascinating, isn't it, how toys from a very young age, before we even understood our roles, our purpose in the world, how they nudged us in certain ways. Now, I'd love to know, what about you? Did you have a particular toy when you think back now that has sort of made you the person that you've become? Has it encouraged you along a certain line of occupation perhaps, or just maybe the way you see the world?
For myself, growing up in the 1980s and 90s, I was lucky. My mum let me play with whatever caught my imagination. I had a train set, plenty of stuffed animals, and while a lot of girls were comparing Barbies, I was usually hosting tea parties for slightly scruffy teddies. And then, of course, there was Mr Frosty, the toy I had wanted for ages, the toy that taught me one very important lesson.
Mr Frosty is such fun, he makes treats for everyone. Pop the ice under his hat, turn the handle just like that. Put in a flavour that you like, and delicious lollies, that's nice.
Does anybody watching remember Mr Frosty? I mean, I have to agree, even looking back now, it looked magical in the adverts. But anyone who actually owned one knows the truth. The ice melted faster than you could crush it, and it was a clever lesson really, in patience, in disappointment, and in the power of marketing aimed at children.
Still, I'm sure that a lot of these toys did plant some seeds. I mean, I can only take myself as an example. I still love traditional trains. I still love going to a good tea party. And if truth be told, if I could invite a chicken to come and sit with me at the dinner table and have a little chat, I'd probably do that too, if my family would allow it.
By the mid-19th century, the toy box had become a classroom, a place where miniature lessons in virtue and vice were taught one turn at a time. For many Victorian parents, a toy wasn't just something to pass the time, it was an opportunity to shape the soul.
If you've ever played the game Snakes and Ladders, then technically you've already stepped into a bit of a Victorian mindset, because this game was developed from an older Indian moral board, which taught about sort of karmic balance. If you hit a snake, then that represents a sin, so greed or gluttony or something like that. And then if you go up a ladder, you're rising to success. You might be a patient person and virtue, that sort of thing. And for the Victorians, they absolutely loved that concept, because it meant that they could use a board game to teach sort of sermons in disguise.
Some games were even blunter about it. There were titles like The Mansion of Happiness or Virtue Rewarded, and they left no doubt about their purpose. Each roll of the dice was a moral choice: land on truthfulness and advance 3 spaces, fall upon idleness or drunkenness and go back to the start. A simple reminder perhaps that no matter how playful the packaging, the lesson was always waiting underneath.
But not all moral lessons came through games. There were other toys that carried more subtle lessons of simplicity and humility and restraint, and peg dolls are a classic example of that.
Made from wooden clothespins, scraps of fabric and a dab of paint, peg dolls celebrated modesty and resourcefulness. They taught children, especially girls, that beauty could come from making do, and that thrift itself was a virtue. And then there were the paper dolls, light, delicate and endlessly adaptable. They became hugely popular in the 19th century, partly because they were cheap to print, making one of the first toys that children from ordinary families could afford. But the earliest examples weren't simply about fashion or fun. They were once again moral lessons in disguise.
One of the first paper doll books was published in London in 1810, and it was named The History of Little Fanny. Yes, I know. And it was a book with a little paper doll in it, and she could be dressed in various ways according to the story, which was told in a rhyme.
Fanny is a vain, disobedient girl who sneaks away to the fair against her mother's wishes and is swiftly punished for it. She loses her finery, falls into poverty, and must work humbly as a servant before finally repenting and earning forgiveness.
It was a paper doll that could quite literally change its clothes and its morals, and it taught lessons in modesty, obedience, and redemption.
And perhaps what makes her so fascinating is how it mirrors a pattern that would return again and again in the centuries to follow, where play became a stage for punishment and toys became teachers through fear.
Little Fanny was not the last doll to carry a moral warning though, because decades later another tale, a chilling one at that, would come about, and a doll would be brought to bring us the message. So let's now look at the story and the doll known as Frozen Charlotte.
In February 1840, the New York Observer reported a chilling true story: a young woman who froze to death on her way to a New Year's Eve ball. She'd insisted, it said, on riding in an open sleigh wearing only her gown. Too vain, the paper claimed, to cover her dress with a cloak. By the time she arrived, she was frozen solid.
The story spread fast, half tragedy, half warning, and within a year it was immortalised in a poem called A Corpse Going to the Ball.
Soon after, a folk ballad appeared, Fair Charlotte, retelling the same grim tale in verse. It was sung by mothers, travellers and even children, its melody sweet, but its message stark. "O daughter dear," her mother cried, "this blanket round you fold. It is a dreadful night, you know, you'll catch your death of cold." "Oh nay," fair Charlotte said, and laughed like a gypsy queen. "To ride in blankets muffled up, I never shall be seen."
As the sleigh sped through the snow, the story tells us that Charlotte started to become quiet, her laughter drowning out by the winter's night.
They tried all within their power, her life for to restore, but Charlotte was a frozen corpse, and is never to speak more.
A few decades later, the story crossed the Atlantic, and so did its message. And then we start to see small
porcelain dolls popping up. These were called frozen Charlottes, and they all carried the same sort of glassy look in their eyes, faint smiles. They were pale, stiff and unjointed figures. Most were manufactured in the porcelain workshops of Germany and shipped around the world. They came in many sizes, from tiny inch-long charms to dolls large enough to cradle. Some were painted delicately with pink cheeks or blue shoes. Others were left pure white, ghostly reminders of the girl in the song. Here at Ilkley Toy Museum, they do of course have a collection of frozen Charlotte figurines. Now if you have a look, obviously they're not all identical, but they do carry the same message. Perhaps that was the point, to love the doll but fear her story. Some versions were even sold in tiny coffin-shaped boxes, padded like miniature caskets. A macabre packaging choice that echoed her fate, part toy, part tomb. Parents, however, didn't see this as morbid, they saw it as meaningful. The doll's lifeless stillness was a sermon in itself, a warning against vanity, pride and disobedience. It seems dark now, but in the Victorian mindset it made perfect sense, because Christmas was a time for reflection, and stories like this could teach children how fragile life could be. I think we can grasp the importance of toys. They are certainly as crucial to our development as, say, the fairy stories that we are read as a child. And I believe that they teach us one of our basic human needs from the start, and that is connection, empathy, compassion, because for many children, me included, toys were our first friends. And when you got that gift at Christmas, that box that you opened, if you got a new toy, that wasn't just opening a new toy, it was meeting and greeting and welcoming a brand new friend into your life. There's something that can be haunting about an old toy, the way its paint has faded, the way a seam has split or an eye has dulled. It's as if it's aged alongside the child who once adored it. Historians might see a toy as an object, but for those who have held it close, they're something else entirely. They're vessels of memory, and we might romanticise that. They remember us, even when we've forgotten them. At Ilkley Toy Museum, there is a bear that carries more than a child's love. He also carries a story. His name is Thomas, and he was gifted to a little boy called Jonathan on his 2nd birthday. But he does carry a bit of a sad tale with him, does Thomas. One day, while his family was staying at their cottage in Norfolk, Jonathan wandered off, and tragically, he fell into a river and he drowned. When they found him, he was still holding Thomas. So Thomas was placed on the mantelpiece and he was put next to the photo of Jonathan. Now this plaque here tells us, now Charlotte, who was Jonathan's bigger sister, she was aged 6 at the time, she started to talk to Thomas and ask him questions about Jonathan. Charlotte would tell her parents that Jonathan was happy and that he loved them all. Now one day Charlotte suddenly shouted out, "No, Jonathan, that's naughty," and an ornament fell to the floor and it broke. Thomas was put out away in a hall cupboard, but then the cupboard toppled over and Charlotte said, "You see, Jonathan wants Thomas to come out of the cupboard." Charlotte continued to chat to Thomas for many years. It is an unsettling story, but it's also a beautiful one. A child's toy that became the bridge between life and death. Thomas reminds us that toys don't just absorb play, we can emotionally attach ourselves to them. They can absorb presence, love, loss, comfort, and sometimes even the echoes of grief. And maybe that's why so many of us hold on to them long after childhood has gone, because in their fabric and fur, something of us remains. Stories like Thomas's aren't exactly unique. There are stories of haunted toys. They sort of abound all over the place if you have a look. However, it brings across that principle that a lot of us maybe feel, especially as when we are children, that toys can carry emotion, that they can be absorbed by our love, by our grief.
And it's interesting the fact that once you give a toy a name, it then becomes more than an object.
And maybe that's why Toy Story the movie struck such a chord when it came along. It took that same old idea, the toy that remembers, and turned it into something tender. We saw our childhood companions come to life, felt their longing not to be forgotten, and wondered perhaps for the first time that the act of letting go can be as painful for them as it is for us.
For centuries, toys were made with wood, tin and porcelain, but as the world changed, so did the way we played.
Mechanics turned to clockwork, clockwork gave way to plastic, and soon even that wasn't enough, because the next generation of toys wouldn't just move, they'd think. And with them came a new kind of storytelling, one written not in rhyme or moral verse, but in circuits and code.
Before toys could think, they could move. So the late 19th, early 20th century started the rise of the clockwork toy.
Wind-up trains, marching soldiers, chattering teeth. Their rhythm was mechanical, but the joy they sparked was pure magic. For the first time, toys didn't just represent the world, they performed it. And for a child watching a tin clown dance or a bird flap its wings, it must have felt like seeing real life coming alive in miniature.
It's easy to forget now with our modern toys that these clockwork toys were once revolutionary. I mean, they were the optimism of the age.
By the mid-20th century, clockwork had given way to electricity and tape. Suddenly toys could talk back. There were dolls that laughed or cried, robots that rolled across the carpet, and even early voice recording playthings like Chatty Cathy and Teddy Ruxpin, their phrases stored on tiny loops inside.
For children of the time, these kind of toys were absolutely magic. They were living things in their eyes. This was a lion. He crouched down and he pounced. So for children, wonderful. But for the adults, there must have been that thinking logically that we were starting to blur the lines between imagination and reality.
By the 1980s and 90s, toys had entered a new frontier. The beeps of Tamagotchis, the pixel pets that lived and died in your pocket, the plasticised friendships of Furbies, blinking and muttering in half-human speech, and of course the game consoles that transformed the living room into another world entirely. Children no longer just played with toys, they interacted with systems. They cared for them, competed against them, and sometimes even mourned them when their batteries died.
In the space of just a few decades, play has changed more than in the centuries before it. The hum of clockwork replaced by the tap of a touchscreen, and toys have been brought into our phones, into our tablets, into our virtual worlds.
Are digital games replacing toys, or are they simply the new tools that teach us to navigate a digital world? Maybe the two aren't enemies at all, maybe they're just different languages for the same thing: curiosity, creativity, connection.
And yet there's something irreplaceable about having the weight of a real toy in your hands.
So perhaps the real question isn't whether technology has taken over, but whether there's still space for both. For the glowing screens and the worn-out teddies. For the instant and the enduring. For the pixel and the peg doll.
When I was a teenager growing up, I was the proud owner, and still am the proud owner, of the Sega Master System. Who remembers this bad boy? For me, it was an absolute treat, and it really, really did make my day. My favourite game was Alex Kidd, which funnily enough came free with the thing. So this was all I played for the first probably year of ownership until the next Christmas came along and I was allowed to ask for some more games. But when I saw this the other day, it got me thinking, if my kids played this today, they'd probably lose interest within about 10 minutes because it'd just be too fuzzy, it'd be too pixelated, it wouldn't be fast enough for them. And I think that's fascinating because I absolutely loved it. It kept me entertained. But it just showed me again that toys seem to change each generation and they grow with us
like the world around us grows. It's not a criticism, it's just an observation. And maybe that's the other fascinating thing about toys, because they are teaching us to live in a world that we're growing into.
I am now going to show you 5 nostalgic toys from the past, and I want you to let me know in the comments whether you remember any of these, whether you have any of these, whether you'd forgotten you even had any of these. Let me know what was your favourite. So number 1 on our little trip down memory lane is Thunderbirds. Who had Thunderbirds toys? Now there's obviously loads of different ones. I think some of them were even done by Corgi. You've got Lady Penelope's car over there. So many available. Number 2 on our trip down memory lane toys. Did anybody have a blow football set? Now this one in particular, it's pre-war, so I don't expect any of you to have had this particular one. However, I know they did versions later on as well, so obviously a really fun game, but probably only fun for a few minutes maybe. Let me know. Is blow football on your Christmas list? Did you have one? Toy number 3, did anybody have a paper theatre or a cardboard theatre in which they could reenact their own little drama on their own little stage? Number 4, down our trip down nostalgia memory lane, who had a Waddington's Formula 1 Great Car Racing game, the board game? Now this was from 1962. Classic board game, simple to learn, but you can perfect your strategy over years of playing. The dice are not used for moving the cars, just for deciding penalties. And lastly, toy number 5, the Cindy doll and the Cindy doll house. Did any of you have a Cindy doll? So that is it. Thank you to everybody for watching. Obviously, a huge thank you to Ilkley Toy Museum in West Yorkshire for allowing us to come and film, for opening it up. Now it is available to the public as well, so if you would like to visit, and I do highly recommend you come and have a visit if you're nostalgic about your toys too, then I'll drop a link to their website in the description below. So we're nearly at Christmas, so we're getting there. Next week we've got another Christmassy video coming, but before that, do let me know what your favourite toy was growing up, and do let me know if you've seen anything in this video that's brought back some nostalgic memories. Okay, until next time guys, stay safe, stay curious, and if you have got that old teddy, do give him a bit of a squeeze.